My name is Natasha Crozier, and I'm just finishing up my MDiv degree here at McMaster. When I was in my 20s, I was in a church that didn't affirm women in ministry, and I hadn't grown up with women being pastors, so it wasn't really something that was on my mind. But as time passed, I did a lot of research into finding your calling in life and what does it look like to have a vocation. And so the women that felt called to be pastors kept cropping up in all the stuff I was reading, and I was like, oh, is this okay? So I spent a good chunk of years changing my theology around women in ministry, just objectively. I wasn't really thinking about going into ministry myself. And then I did sort of feel like God had played a hilarious trick on me, because all of a sudden one day I realized I was called to pastor too. And then I was like, what? So that was exciting, but also because I was in a church that didn't affirm that, it was really discouraging at the time. It was just a real wrestling, what happens next. And so eventually we ended up in a church with a female pastor and just watching her process, and I was like, this is the kind of job I want to do. So then it was time to look for where I could do my MDiv, and I ended up here. Actually a big factor for me to choose MDC, because I just felt like, oh, this may be a place where we're already so far past the conversation that I can just relax, because I had been so in the thick of all the arguments of why it was fine to be a woman in ministry. And so it was like, oh, this won't even be a question here? That sounds great. So that was part of it. Well, coming from the States, and an evangelical conservative background, there are still major obstacles facing women in ministry in certain circles, because it is still well, you can be a director, but we won't acknowledge that the work you're doing is actually pastoring. And we won't pay for your education the way we pay for our other staff members and all those elements. And, even women's ministry budgets, all those sort of things that are considered very secondary compared to everyone else. But here in Hamilton, it's been great. I've been working at churches that have female pastors, and I think I realize some of the barriers are more internal then. It's actually me realizing that I am allowed to use my voice and that it will be respected. There's still a learning curve for me to have the confidence to be in the place that I am now. So I think it's as we move into circles that are affirming of women, it's we still have our own work to do to be yeah, we can do this. We're supposed to be here and participate and be at the table. So yeah, I feel all the profs here were so encouraging, and it really did feel it wasn't even a question that I would be in the classroom. And so that right off the bat is a huge encouragement. And even every syllabus talking about inclusive language and affirming women in ministry, you just feel you're in a safer place. And specifically, I took 2 preaching classes, and it came up multiple times, how women are important voices in the church, and just really more explicit encouragement to us directly. I took Women in Christian History. Having that course was amazing, because meeting women who you never heard of before, and then understanding their faith experience and realizing it's, in some ways totally different, they're a Catholic nun or whatever, but in some ways just feeling that bond of you had an experience I can relate to in a totally different way than those church fathers or something, where you just felt oh, those guys were doing some really cerebral work, and then you read some of the women, you're I just really relate to how you interacted with scripture in this different and organic way. And to see their example that's already almost 1,000 years old, and you're see, women have been here all along. It was really encouraging. I loved that course. So, well, I think we do still always have a ways to go in just modeling being in the spaces. So somebody like Cindy Westfall, to me then is like, look, here's a woman who's been paving the way and been like, you know, making spaces safer for women academics and doing her best work. And so it's kind of that invitation. It like opens the doors for everyone else to be like, just her existing in her role, you know, and doing the things that she's doing. So I think that's kind of like, just to do your role where you are and be visible already communicates to other women, like, this is something I could do too. And especially with kids. So modeling for the kids being their pastor, I just feel like that's really important, both for the boys and the girls. You know, it's like girls see someone pastoring and they're like, I can grow up and be that. And boys see a woman pastoring and think, this is a voice that I can respect and listen to. And it's like starting from a young age, instead of like suddenly being like, wait, I have never thought of a woman's voice having spiritual authority. So I think that's also just a really important piece for me, is like, let's make sure this is a norm for our kids. I mean, I think the financial aid is huge. I was a recipient of a lot of financial aid, and that made a huge difference for me being able to take school full time and really dedicate myself to studies instead of being like, well, I also need to be working part-time or finding other income. So that's huge. And especially just to encourage women that we value you and we want your scholarship and your voice. That's big, so.